The behavior of Mr. Trump is a theater appealing to a very angry part of the population.
ريتشارد وولف أستاذ الاقتصاد الفخري في جامعة ماساتشوستس.
What happens to me, the white Christian man, losing everything that had been promised to me?
How did this economic tragedy, let's say, shift into a cultural war?
A tariff is a tax. Why would you isolate the United States? And then this abject support of Israel. Their enemies politically funded them economically. We remain the dominant economy in the world. Mr. Trump is the revenge and reaction to that.
But if we look at the Middle East, we can feel American dominance. Professor Richard Wolff, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, thank you.
You're a professor in economics, and we want to have this time to try to understand what's going on in maybe global economics, but beginning from the US current status. I want to start with two observations, one small, irrelevant maybe. I had this observation coming here in this visit to the US, comparing to my last visit, which was maybe 7 years ago. The price inflation is huge, it's immense. Maybe everything is more than doubled. That's what I had a haircut for $80, so that's immense. And at the same time, there is the observation of the macro numbers. So one sees that inflation still is up maybe 3.4%, while the growth of the American economy is just at 1.4. So inflation is bigger than the growth. New jobs in August, I believe, is 22,000 new jobs, which is a meager number. At the same time, we hear the political rhetoric, beginning from the Biden years, saying that it's better than ever. And with Trump, the rhetoric is turbocharged. It's better historically. How can one explain the gap between the political rhetoric and what one sees with his own eyes?
I think you just have to understand domestic American politics. The more serious the economic difficulty, and this has been going on for now 15, 20 years, the more important the role of the government in performing a theater of the opposite. In other words, you compensate for the anxiety of the people who have to pay the elevated prices, who don't see jobs being created, who understand that rents are out of control for your housing. You have to do something to deal with their anxiety. And the political choice made by the Democrats and Republican leaderships is to produce a theater of the opposite. We are wonderful. Everything is under control. We remain the dominant economy in the world. Constantly performing this piece of theater. And yes, there are a growing number of people who don't believe it anymore. There are a growing number of critics. What you begin to see in America, and you see it in Europe too, is the end of the average middle. There are either those people who go with the theater, who love it, who appreciate it, who want to believe it, and who do believe it. But on the other side, a growing chorus of people who are astonished by this gap and are turning away. The middle falls apart. Yeah. The extreme right wing celebrates American dominance. They always did. The left wing is beginning to question in a fundamental way almost everything, because if the government is a theatric and not a reality, well, then what about everything else it tells you? And you can see it. You can see it, for example, here in New York City, where we have a young man who is a Muslim and who calls himself a socialist, who's about to become elected to mayor. And the majority of the people in New York, month after month, answer the polls. They want him for mayor. They don't want the conventional old politics. We have a former governor of New York running for mayor. He's way behind in the polls to a young, Muslim socialist. And you know, New York City has the largest concentration of Jewish people in the country, and they are voting for the
And
Muslim
also
as well.
it's called the capital of capitalism. So having a democratic socialist as its mayor.
Tells you something. It tells you, and you know, to be honest, this is not so much about socialism, or for that matter, about Islam. This is about American people wanting to say no to what's going on. It's a rejection of the status quo much more than it is an advocacy of what to do next.
That's why in the polling, the matter of affordability got much of the resonance in Zohran Mumdani's campaign.
Yeah, Mumdani is able to say the affordability is out of control. We're going to stop letting people raise your rent. Well, urban politics in the United States has always been heavily controlled by real estate. They have the money invested in the buildings, and they're the ones who spend the money to buy the politicians. So he is saying, not me. Now, in the past, people wouldn't believe it. Now they are so frustrated by the Republicans and the Democrats that they will say it. Mr. Mumdani, if he plays his cards right, will not only be the mayor, he will then, if he wins, he'll become the politician on the left in America. He'll be the person ahead of Bernie Sanders or ahead of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others who are now openly socialist. It is now possible to do that in the United States because the audience for it is enormous.
So the question would be then, why did we reach this phase? How did not only the US economy, we see the same trends in Europe and many places in the world. Why we reached this point after the promises of the 20th century, especially after World War II, when in France they talk about 30 Glorieuses, the glorious 30 years.
Right.
And even in the US, everything was roaring, not only the 20s, especially after World War II. What went wrong?
Well, to do a little bit of history, which is what you're asking me to do, I would argue that the United States was absolutely dominant from the end of World War II, 1945, to around the mid-70s, those 30 years, 30 années glorieuses, were spectacular for the United States. It was the only economy to emerge from World War II largely unaffected. I mean, it's important for people to remember. Bombs fell on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. After that, nothing. No bomb fell here. Nothing was destroyed. No factory burnt. Nothing. And the number of troops were sent to Europe and Japan, but they were relatively small as a percentage of the population. Perhaps most important to understand was that the war was an economic blessing to the United States because it put millions of people back to work who had been unemployed for the entirety of the 1930s. The Great Depression staggered the American economy. Production fell. It's not that it didn't grow, it fell. In 1933, 25% of the American labor force is out of work. 1 out of 4 workers, every family has an unemployed person.
Because of the Great Depression.
Because of the Great Depression. So they tried everything to fix it. Didn't work. One thing worked at the end: war.
So it's not the New Deal.
Not the New Deal. The New Deal helped. The New Deal was a move to the left. The New Deal dropped the inequality in this country dramatically. So it achieved many things. The Social Security that we have today was achieved then. The unemployment compensation workers get was achieved then. The minimum wage we never had before was achieved then. I could go on.
Yeah.
Great things were done, but solve the problem? Not enough. The war did that. For the war, half the unemployed were put in a uniform, and the other half were given jobs making the uniform. So suddenly you had, and the guns, and the bullets, and the planes. So suddenly you had full employment. You never had that before. For 6 years, basically in 1939-40, what begins to 45, you had the rebuilding of an economy. Now, yes, for war, but everything had to be built up for the war. You had to rebuild your steel, your coal, your iron, all of it. You know, there's a similarity today that people don't see, but they should. The war in Ukraine has enabled the Russians to stimulate and rebuild their economy so that for the last 3 years of the war now, the rate of growth of the economy of Russia is greater than that of the United States. The war isn't hurting them. The war is functioning for Russia the way the war did for the United States back in the day of the World War II. So the war is over. Germany is destroyed. Japan is destroyed. Britain, France, Germany, all destroyed. The United States is alone. Now, if you were a rational thinker with some history, you would understand that that can't last, that this is a very exceptional situation. But for 30 years, it was magnificent for the United States. They were the booming economy. If you wanted to rebuild your economy in Europe, you had to get American machines. You had to get American raw materials. When you couldn't afford it, the United States gave you a loan, Marshall Plan, to let you pay for what you bought. The Marshall Plan had a little clause in it that people don't know. Here is all this money. You can only use it to buy American goods. You can't use it for anything else. That's why it was a stimulus for the U.S., and it just made this a boom period. Now, short history. By the middle of the 1970s, this game is over. The Japanese have recovered. The Germans have recovered. The Europeans have recovered, which you knew they would. And now you're beginning to have competition. The United States had no competition. In those 30 glorious years, when they gave a Marshall Plan to the Europeans and others, you had to spend the United States, it was a signal to the Americans, you can charge whatever price you want, because the Belgians who are building that road, they have to pay you. Because otherwise they have no money. They can't buy anywhere else. They can't use it anywhere else.
But the foundation of the U.S. economy then was based on the industrial and military complex since World War II.
That's right. Built up during the war, by the war, and never relaxed after the war. There was a debate in this country. Do we demobilize after the war? And that debate was lost by those in favor of demobilization and won largely by the military producers, the companies, who understood that they had become very rich during the war and wouldn't be if there was a demobilization. So we never had a demobilization.
That's why I guess Eisenhower is the president who warned about the growing influence of the military complex in politics.
Yeah, because he, even as president, discovered that when he made moves to demobilize, which he as a general, because that's what he was before he was president, he understood the war was a tremendous strain on people, killed a lot of people, it should stop. And the military producers, no stop. And they won. They controlled the Congress. He couldn't move. So he gave that speech warning, look what you're doing. Nobody listened because it was impossible to listen. The military in our country are active in every state. In every state, they have loyal ex-soldiers, they have the companies that supply them with everything, and those have been mobilized into a political force that almost no politician dares to confront. Because if you do that, you will become the object of their anger, and they will not give you a penny, and they will give your opponent, the first one who steps up, all the money that they used to give you, so your political career is finished.
But the question is that if this kind of economic system was built during the war, you can fund it through the sales of weaponry everywhere, because we are in World War II, so everyone is fighting everyone. We have lots of clients. But then the war is over, but the machine of military production still is ongoing. Where do you pay this from?
You tax the mass of your people. That's the way you pay for it. You sell some of it abroad. There are always clients, governments who will take your older submarine or your older tank, which is what they sell. Meanwhile, they spend all the money necessary to develop the next generation of fighter plane or tank or missile. That never stops. And you shoot it into, look at now. One of the reasons they're doing poorly in Ukraine is we don't have any more weapons. We've given them for 3 years all the weapons we can give them without reducing our stockpile. That's why Mr. Putin can smile at the Europeans when they shake their right. They don't have it. He does. They don't. He's built up his war machine. They let the United States be the military power they were allied with who would take care of it. They have no military. Yeah. It's a joke. If you look at the numbers, they don't have it. They just can't. It's their reaction. But let me go back to the story. When the United States faces competition in the 1970s, what is it going to do? How is it going to deal? Because remember, the Japanese, the Germans, and others were very smart. They understood in the 30 glorious years, 45 to 75, that if you're going to rebuild your German economy or your Japanese economy, you have to do it in a focused way to defeat the United States, because the United States is global dominant. If you're going to produce a car, it has to be better and cheaper than the American. Enter the Volkswagen. If you're going to produce a car in Japan, it better be cheaper and better. Toyota. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but you understand. So when they come back competitively famous, powerful. The American automobile industry now is virtually dead. We still have some, but General Motors produces more cars in China than it does in the United States. This is an American company by history, but not by its future.
But wasn't this defended after the Nixon shock that we are we are post-industrial state now?
Yeah, post.
Yeah. So we deal in financial tools.
I'm coming. I'll show you how that works. Okay, so the American companies, how did they handle the competition, whether it be from Volkswagen or anybody else? They did three things, American companies. The first thing is automation. We bring in the 1970s the computer into the production process. The computer, then the robot, then now artificial intelligence. A massive destruction of jobs, replacing workers with machines. Number one, a real powerful innovation. Number two, at least as important, the export of jobs. Factories close across America. They were doing it before, but they really begin to do it in the 70s. The most advantageous, the most risky entrepreneurs move first. They go to China, they go to Vietnam, they go to India, they go to Brazil, they go to many places, and they make a fortune. It turns out they can pay a wage that's 1/4 of what they pay in Cincinnati or Chicago or St. Louis. And the ones left behind who are, I'm not going to go to China, that's too far away, realize they're going to lose the competition with the American who went first. So it becomes a mass exodus. In 30 years, American industry is hollowed out. It's gone. It's the car you drive, the toaster you make in your breakfast, it's all being brought from outside. And the factories here, if you go to Detroit if you haven't. Go look at the factories, the auto factories. They're empty. Nothing happened. Weeds are growing out of the parking lots. They're finished. They're gone forever. The machines are rusted and dead. So what happens to the American economy? Well, for the 10% of the people who are rich, who buy shares of stock, they are having a wonderful time in the period 1975 to 2010. Why? Because they're participating in the profits to be made when you produce in China, pay the workers a quarter of what you pay, and keep the rest as your profits, which you share with your shareholders. Okay, we're having a wonderful time here. The stock market booms the way it never has. Only problem is the American people can't afford anything anymore because they have no jobs. Solution. You introduce a new purchasing power to the American working class. It's called consumer credit. You go to the banks and you say, give them money, lend them money. But the banks say, we've never lent consumers money. It's too risky. Solution, charge them ridiculous interest rates. A credit card, the major form of this, carries an interest rate in this country, average, you ready? 17 to 20%. That's what people pay here who have a credit balance. Every month they take out of it, and that's the annual rate of return. It's a fantastic boom for the banks. All the banks become credit banks so that they're on every corner. That's where their money is to giving the working class money. So in the 1970s, as the jobs disappear because the computer replaces the worker or the job is sent overseas, the American working class, particularly the highest paid workers in industry who had the strong unions, who had won high wages in the period decades, they were the ones that employers wanted to replace with the cheap labor the most because they were the savings of the high. It was as if history had a terrible trick to play on the American worker, that the more successful you are in winning higher wages, the greater the incentive you give the employer to replace you, either with a machine or a cheap worker overseas. So they left. And the American working class did not fight that battle, tried to, too weak. And so it solved the problem of the fact that it had poor wages now, lousy jobs, by taking on credit. And for the next 30 years, the sustenance of the consumer economy of the United States was on credit, not on earning wages. President Clinton in the 1990s was able to say twice, as if it were a joke, we are dependent on the credit card. Exactly. He understood. By 2010, you couldn't do it anymore because you had borrowed too much money, the working class, with no basic income with which to repay. So everything crashes in 2008 and 9. It should have happened earlier. It was delayed by the credit boom. Meanwhile, because Americans kept buying, the logic of moving production to Asia made sense. You produced there, you paid very low wages. Even when you added the cost of shipping all that stuff from China back to the United States, it's still more profitable than paying the high wages here. And the American working class taught during the 30 glorious years that we were the great success of capitalism. We had a huge middle class. Average worker could have a car and a home and a paid vacation, a blah, blah. All of that had been promised, the so-called American dream, was out of reach. You couldn't do it. If you did it for a while, you did it on credit, and you knew you can't pay it back. The credit card works as follows. At the end of the month, you get a bill. But it says, if you pay this minimum, that's enough. We'll carry your loan. The minimum is a tiny fraction, 2 or 3% of your debt. So you say, oh, great, I can send $25, which I can afford, and I keep my credit card, which I keep using. Each month I do this.
And the interest rates keep...
And the interest rate applies because, of course, it's wonderful for the bank. It's the best investment they could make. They're earning 17, 18, 19% on a loan to a desperate person.
So before the late 70s, banks didn't have credits for commercial reason. It was just for investment.
No,
mostly.
they gave money, loans to corporations, to companies,
but not consumer.
But not to the consumer. The only consumer who had it was an executive who had something called the American Express or the diner's card. That was for highly paid people to give them a way to move around the world with a credit without having to change money.
But not to the average American.
But for the average American, completely out of the question. That was a whole new design in the 1970s to put everybody in debt. And if you talk to an average American today, they will show you half a dozen credit cards or debit cards, as they're called, that are in their wallets right now. It's a system that totally relies on credit. And if that credit begins to shake, as it did in the second half of 2008, the economy completely tanks. Okay, so that's why we have deindustrialized the United States. We made a deal with China. It's a little bit Mephistophelian if you understand the literature. Yeah. The deal is this: the Chinese want to stop being one of the poorest countries in the world, which they were. And they needed to focus on development. Ironically, after World War II, they got no help from the West because the Chinese Communist Party was in charge there and had won their civil war. So they got no help, for which they will be eternally grateful, because they had to rely on themselves. And they have proven for the whole world that the reliance on yourself, which they didn't choose, that was forced on them by the United States and the West. You know, the United States did not recognize the government of Mao Zedong until the early 70s, when Nixon and Kissinger went to China to open it up. Problem: in those 30 glorious years, the Chinese went to work to develop their own economy on their own resources with no help. They got a little bit of help from the Soviet Union in the early years, but by 1960, the two countries were at war with each other. They had military clashes on the Russian-Chinese border. They had no more help. They did it themselves, but they were smart enough to understand that they could go much faster if they could work a benefit with the advanced capitalist countries of the West. So they did. They offered American companies and European companies and Japanese companies a deal. You come here to China. We will let you and help you build a factory, build an office, build a warehouse, whatever you need, ports, air facilities. We will help you. We will give you a disciplined, educated workforce at a ridiculously low wage. You can do this nowhere in the world. Yeah. There are places in the world where you can pay people less, but they will not be educated, trained, disciplined worker people. We have that. You don't. We'll give you that. And you know what else we'll do? We will let you sell into the Chinese market. And that was a fast-growing market.
In return for what?
In return, you invest here, and you share your technology with us. That's the deal. Nobody forced the Americans to do this. The Chinese didn't have the power to make it happen. They could offer. They did. And American companies saw an opportunity. The far-sighted American companies, and there are those, with executives, I can introduce you to, who will tell you, we understood that the future is over there. And the sooner you get yourself established there, the better chance you have of participating in that growth. Now, they didn't think in those years we would have what we have now. But those are the people who are the best off. Occidental Petroleum, just to give you an example. Yeah. These are people who are in wonderful shape with China because of what they did early on. So the Chinese then got what they wanted. They got an enormous help from the West. Their enemies politically funded them economically. There's an old joke in the history of capitalism, that capitalists are so focused on profit that they will sell to the hangman the rope he'll use to hang them. All right? And there's wisdom here, because we are living that experience. China is now a very complicated economy, very successful. Look, it's the first serious competitor economically. And I'm an economist, so that's how I'm speaking to you. It's the first serious competitor we've had in a century.
But now you've told the short story of history of the falling out of the US economy, or at least not the US economy, but the middle class and the growing rift between those who have and those who don't. But then we'll talk about the current affairs, comes Trump. Out of the anger that you spoke about at the beginning of many people about the lost American dream. And he promises a change. And then we see economic policies that are drastic, especially for a Republican president, having tariffs all across the world at ridiculous rates, right, and unpredictable trajectory of these tariffs. We never know what's next.
Right.
And at the same time, he does the lowering of the taxes for the biggest corporations, especially the tech corporations, and he reduces the expenses of government from Medicaid and others. What is the rationale between these policies that this administration took in order, as it says, to fight inflation and the current affairs?
Okay, let's go quickly through it. The behavior of Mr. Trump is a theater. It's a theater appealing to a very angry part of the population. If you look at where the jobs were lost that were most important to America over those last 30, 40 years that we're talking, moving to China and India, Brazil, and so forth, they were the jobs of the highest wages, unionized jobs in factories. They were the industry. And the industry in America and the unionization of the industries is a specific population. It is white, male, and Christian.
Those are the jobs that was lost.
Yeah, the people who lost the good jobs were white, male, and Christian. They lost them. They thought, the cream of the crop, which in a sense they were. They lived the best standard of living. They were those parts of the working class that were the best paid. They had the envious jobs. And they were suddenly dropped from the top of the working class to the bottom. The man who loses his job in the machines and becomes a greeter at Walmart. The person who says hello, thank you for coming to Walmart, and who gets paid nothing and has no job security and has no future. This is the opposite. This is a man, particularly men, this is a man who has promised to have a wife whom he takes care of, who will be with the children at home. He will earn enough money for her to live and for the children to be properly educated and so forth. He can't do that anymore. During these are the years when the women in America, white women, black women always had to work, white women went into the workforce. They had to. There was no way, even with credit, that the family could survive the standard of living they had become used to. So now the wife and the husband have to go out to work full time. They come home, they're exhausted. They don't want to cook. So they buy ready-made food. That costs much more money. Blah, blah. So they borrow more money. You can see they're caught in a... So they are very angry. They look to the Republicans and the Democrats. In fact, first the Democrats, because out of World War II, the Democrats come as the friend of the working class because they got Social Security, unemployment. That was a Democratic president.
Roosevelt years.
Yeah, those years. And remember, Roosevelt, who taxed corporations and the rich. Oh. He really did. And to produce mass benefits to the poor and the middle class is the most popular president the United States ever had. He was re-elected three times, yeah. Right? No president before, and by law, no president since. I mean, Mr. Trump is about to try and see whether he can do it. Well, you know, the level of anger, what you're watching here is that the era of globalization, that was the wonderful ideological gloss, the BS packaging of the last 40 years. It'll be wonderful. We're going to globalize. We're going to use the whole world. We're going to bring China and the world into the world economy, and we will all be better off. This was a song that
and
was...
we will remove the borders.
What?
And we'll remove the economic
who
borders.
Needs the borders? You know, the European Union, there's no longer a frontier between Italy and France, and this will become everywhere in the world. It's just one... We will all be a multicultural, happy planet. This was the baloney, nonsense, to cover what the real issue was to get the American people to accept deindustrialization, the loss of all those jobs, the redependence of everybody on credit.
So now it's a cost that you will bear now, but wait, the future will be great.
Yeah, always. Right? As in so many religions, it may be bad now, but right after you're dead, get much better.
Yeah,
I won't go there.
that's fine.
But you understand, it was a way of making it acceptable to the American people. But for those who lost their jobs, it wasn't enough. They got angrier and angrier. They kept listening to one president after another, Republican and Democrat alike, celebrating globalization, subsidizing the company so it could go abroad. Let me just finish. What happens for me, say these workers? What happens to me, the white Christian man, losing everything that had been promised to me, that I had even gotten a little bit of in the glorious 30 years, 45 to 7? What happens to me? And the answer from the established politicians was nothing. We're going to do for you nothing. In fact, if he read every day the newspaper, what was happening was that the government was all concerned about, now get ready, black, brown people and women. They were moving, demanding in the civil rights movement, the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter movement. That's where the political punch was coming. So they were able to see nothing is done for me and everything is done for those people. And Mr. Trump is the revenge and reaction to that. He's going to take care of white Christian men, and he's going to squash brown, black, and women.
That's exactly my question here. How did this economic tragedy, let's say, shift into a cultural war? How did that happen? Because if one hears at least...
I'll answer. Very simple. Because you could not, in the taboo of American culture, you could never blame the corporate executives who made the decisions. That's taboo. You cannot say to the no politician, none of them, not even the best of them, is able or willing to stand up and say, this whole situation comes about because the profit motive of private capitalism teaches them, the leaders, to go where the profit is highest. They don't care what they leave behind. They never did. If you look at the history of the United States, capitalism begins in New England, where we are here.
Yeah.
Then it moves to the Midwest. You know what we call the Midwest now? The Rust Belt, because nothing happens there. It's a disaster. I was born in Youngstown, Ohio, right in the middle of that area. Total disaster as a place. No jobs, no industry, nothing, right? No one is allowed to say profit maximization is the cause of the decision to move capitalism from New England to the Midwest, from the Midwest to the South and the Far West, and now out of the United States altogether to China, to India, to Brazil. We can't blame the corporations, even though they're the ones who made the decision. They're the ones.
Because they fund politicians?
They made the decision to close the factory.
Wow.
If the factory closes in Chicago, it's because the board of directors of that company said the factory closes. They're the decision makers. The politicians, they pay to say nothing about it, to observe this taboo, to say this is all a cultural war, as if that's going to save you. But in this country, that ideology flies. People are willing to do all kinds of things about the right or not right to have an abortion, or the right or the not right to burn the flag, or the right or the not right to have a little gun in the back of your car, because you feel safer, even if it means you're crazy, right? We have our cultural rules, and they correctly understood. So the problem again is this taboo, which is the ideology of a private capitalist system, that whatever goes wrong, you have to blame somebody other than the capitalist. And so you find somebody. Mr. Trump understood, I don't think he could explain this, but he understood on some level that there was a raging population that would support him, even though he wasn't part of it. He's not Christian. He never went to church. He is a white male, but he never worked in his life. He inherited millions of dollars and has lived on that all his life, buying and selling apartments, trying to start businesses, almost all of which go bankrupt. So there's no commonality except one. He articulates the rage, and he focuses the rage on the safe scapegoat. So the immigrant becomes the, if you heard his speech yesterday or the day before to the UN, he said to the delegates of all the countries of the world listening to him that they were all countries in terrible shape compared to the US, because we're getting rid of immigrants and they haven't done enough to get rid of immigrants in their country.
They live in
your country, all your
they live in hell.
They live in hell. All, I mean, just but that crazy speaks to the people in this country who have been badly damaged by globalization. If you go to large parts of this country, you refer to someone as a globalist, it's as if you were attacking their mother.
Wow.
Or something unspeakable that is so, it's the worst thing you could do. In many places, it's worse than calling someone a communist, which used to be play that role. It's now played by globalists. So what they were able to do, use this globalization mantra, industry was hollowed out. What was left to the Americans, besides a desperate working class living off of credit, were a few companies that in that situation were able to survive and to grow. And they were the companies that we call Silicon Valley, high tech, Apple, Amazon, Intel, Oracle, all of them, and the name IBM, you know all of them, okay? They were able, thanks to certain technological, to become the success stories of American capitalism. But that's partly because there was no other success. All of the industries, I mean, again, as an example I often give, 15 years ago, competition began among all the automobile companies of the world to come up with a new electric automobile which would replace the gas and oil burning car. Because of pollution, because all the reasons we know.
Yeah.
Okay, so everybody tried. Toyota tried, GM tried, Ford, they all made experiments. Okay, now 15 years later, it's over. We know who won and we know who lost. The winner of that competition is called the BYD Corporation. It stands for the English words, build your dream. Actually, English words, but it is a Chinese company.
But there was for a certain period of time Tesla also.
Right. Tesla was the first, but not the best.
Yeah.
And that's why Tesla is having the problems it has. But it's always good to be the first. No question, to be the first. BYD makes the best quality, lowest price electric cars and trucks. End of conversation. But in the United States now, as I'm speaking to you, there is 100% tariff. An initial one by Trump, 25%, raised to 100% by Mr. Biden and kept at 100% by Mr. Trump. Okay? So if you wish to, for example, to get a good quality electric car or truck, you pay $30,000, you get the truck shipped from China to the United States, but before you can get it, you have to give the American government another $30,000, 100%. So the cost to you of this thing is $60,000. Okay, so the United States does that. And why does it do it? It does it to protect the jobs of the General Motors Ford Corporation, because it's finished if it can't compete. So what does an American company that needs a car or a truck and wants an electric one, what does it do? It buys one from Tesla or General Motors or Ford.
Any American company.
any American company pays maybe 50 to 60,000 and gets an inferior truck. Everywhere else in the world, the competitors of the United States, whoever they are, wherever they are, would never do such a thing. For $30,000, they get a better truck. You know,
But then you are financing these American industries to be better. That's the rationale.
to be better.
Because now they have more money, they can invest more, and they can compete through producing a better car.
But here's your problem. They had more money when this competition started. They failed. They failed. And there's no guarantee that they will use the money in that way because they have other problems. But before we get to that, let's be clear we understand. All the competitors of the United States around the world will be able to buy electric cars and trucks for their businesses that are better in quality and lower in price. You know what that means for the United States? Economic decline when other people can produce more cheaply and a better quality. This protecting of our industry will happen at the expense of this country. You will have been protected one industry and you will have damaged all the others. This is not a very smart policy. This is called in American slang, shooting yourself in the foot. Don't do this.
But usually
Wait a
tariffs...
minute. It's good theater. It's a wonderful television program where the American, but I won't let any of these Chinese cars into our car. I am saving the, I've learned it. It's all a theater that is not only not successful, it's the worst imaginable. Look, the tariffs are the same thing. You pointed out correctly that the Republican Party, of which Mr. Trump is the leader, has for the last 100 years been the anti-tax party in this country. Lower taxes, no taxes.
Smaller government.
Little government, cut the government, all of that. Private is wonderful, government terrible, all that. So what do you make of a president who's the head of the Republican Party coming in? Let's remember, a tariff is a tax. It's a tax on the Americans who bring foreign goods into this country. The tariff program of Mr. Trump is the biggest imposition of taxes on the American economy by any government. Just think with me, what would possess a country to reverse for 100 years the dogma of its political leaders, Republicans, so that the latest one reverses it and no one says a word?
Why?
They look at him, he's punishing the British or the French or the
From a
tariff.
nationalist standpoint.
Yes, he's not. America first, America first, more theater. But the bottom line is, what is he doing? Everybody who has ever studied tariffs, I have taught courses on tariffs because they've been around for a long time. There's nothing new about a tariff, hundreds of years old. We know from the literature, from the history, what tariffs do. The company that brings in the French wine or the Japanese electronics or anything from anywhere, if that importer has to pay the government a tariff, then that importer does two things. Tries either to get the country from which it comes to lower their prices to offset the tariff, or charge the final consumer in America more money to offset the tariff. Because if he doesn't do that, the tariff comes out of his own profits.
It would be at a loss. Yeah.
At a loss. So you know what this is going to do. It's going to cause grief in the countries that send the goods here. That's why they protest. And it's called grief in the American people who are going to face higher prices, more or less, product to product, country to country. Why would a president of any country ever want to do something that aggravates the whole world and damages the consumers who vote for him. Well, here's the answer. And this summarizes everything I want to tell you about the American economy. It's desperate. We are at the end. We are at a desperate moment. We are watching a desperate politician acting in a bizarre way that you can all identify with. You can see it. And you have to then go with me to the question, the interesting question. Why is this happening?
Definitely.
Why do you have behavior that you can see is going to cause real trouble? And the only answer to that question is always the same answer, because all the alternatives are worse. What is he going to do? The reality is, as hard as I know for Americans particularly, but for others as well to face, the world economy has changed, and it's not going back.
Has changed towards what?
Here's the change. In 1945, the United States was absolutely dominant. It accounted for half world trade. The dollar, its local currency, became the global currency, as we all know, and it continued for 30 years. It eventually, a deal was made with Saudi Arabia and so forth to price oil in dollars, so the whole world has to deal with it, blah, all of that, we know. What it seems to be unknown is that every historical example of a country that rises to the position of global dominance, empire, also eventually peaks and goes down and disappears. The Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, the Ottoman Empire, I could go on. Every continent has them. We're going down. Ours is over. We had a very nice 20th century, but it's finished. And here's the numbers to help you. The United States and its major allies are called the G7.
Yeah.
The G7, right? The United States, Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and Canada. That's the G7. If you add them up, it's maybe 10% of the world's people. If you look at China and the BRICS, that's China and its allies, the comparable to G7, that's over 50% of the world's people. Right off the beginning then, 10 and 50. We all understand one is much larger than the other. But now let's go to the economics. In economics, we have a rough statistic called the GDP, Gross Domestic Product. It's a rough measure of the output of goods and services in one calendar year in a country. So every country keeps a record, the UN keeps records, and so forth. So you can take the GDP of the United States, and you can add to it the other 6 members of the G7. And you come up with a number that these 7 countries together account for about 28%, give or take, of total GDP of the planet we live on. Now we do the same calculation for China and the BRICS, 35%. Now let me explain to you. It's over. There's no longer a contest between these two. One has won and the other one has lost. One is growing as a share of the world. The other one is shrinking. You know, when they were together equal, roughly the same, in the year 2020. And it's gotten worse and worse and worse across a Democrat, across a Republican. It doesn't matter.
But there was an answer, if I remember correctly, it was Pompidou in France, when asked about the German resurgent economy back in the 70s. And he was asked that, don't you fear that Germany is surpassing France? Maybe it was him, maybe it's Mitterrand, I can't remember. He said, yes, they are, but we have the atomic bomb. So the US can say now, okay, they are larger in population, they are bigger in terms of GDP, but we have the military-industrial complex. We in the Middle East hear about the BRICS and the balance of power on the worldwide stage, but if we look at the Middle East, we can feel American dominance. We can't see Chinese dominance. We can see even Russian, even they were in Syria for a period of time.
You will.
We will.
You will.
Even in terms of military.
Yeah. You can't, it's the old story again. The military, whatever the military has ever thought, is dependent on the larger economic realities that serve that military. If that economic reality is in difficulty or trouble, it will undermine the military. It's not, you can't run your military. Let me give you a couple of examples. When the war in Ukraine begins, the President of the United States, Mr. Biden, and the people, his advisors around him, made a number of very confident statements. The ruble will become rubble. The Russians will lose. They will lose quickly. And the reason is we in America and all of our European allies are 100% behind Mr. Zelensky in Ukraine. It won't take any time at all. All right. The reality, none of that happened.
Yeah.
The ruble didn't decline. It's worth roughly now what it was at the beginning of the war. The Russian economy, as I told you, has done better since the war began than worse. The Russian troops keep moving westward, now occupy, I don't know, 20, 25% of what was Ukraine, and there's no end of that process. Every weapon system, F-16s, Abrams tanks, fast missiles, whatever it is, doesn't work. It all failed. What's wrong? What happened? Well, it turned out that the biggest military power, the United States, arguably one of the biggest economic powers in the world, the United States, with its allies in Europe, and their military, are losing. They're losing the war. And they're only fighting Russia. They're not even fighting China yet. What's going? You ought to, if nothing else, you have to ask the question, what might this mean? China has nuclear weapons. Russia has nuclear weapons. I don't know. I mean, I can't speak to how well their army is developed and how well their military work. I can't say that for the United States either. But I do know one thing. The United States went to war in Vietnam in 1975. The enemy was the Communist Party of North Vietnam under Ho Chi Minh. The people who run that country now are the Communist Party of Vietnam, not the United States. The United States sent an enormous number of troops to Vietnam. It lost. It next went to Afghanistan and fought the Taliban. It lost there too. The Taliban is in charge now, politically, in Afghanistan. It didn't do well in Iraq. It's losing in the Ukraine. What's this notion of the invincibility of the American military? That's what everybody maybe thinks, but it's not really what you see. And if the American military are in the shape that they're in, why are they having to give bonuses to get people to sign up to the military? They're having to do that, big ones. And who are they getting, and what's the mentality? And in a country whose president is literally a white supremacist, when the military, if I understand correctly, has 20 or 30% of its people who aren't white. I mean, how exactly is all this going to work out? I don't know. I don't pretend to know. But the notion that the United States, and it's a very dangerous notion, not because people outside the United States believe it. It has its problems there. It's more dangerous in terms of what Americans believe, because there already is, the temptation to handle, to deal with a declining economic situation and a declining political situation by using what you still have, may be dominant. Your economy isn't, your political isn't, Your military may be, so maybe you better use it and better sooner because the direction of change is not favoring you. Time does not look like it's on your side. So there may be a temptation. I listened the other day to a general who's Mr. Trump's key advisor on Ukraine, right? And the general was talking about, let's stop fooling around. Let's really use all of our weapons and take out the Russians. Okay. You know, if I hear that at a bar on the afternoon, I understand it's the liquor talking. But if I hear this general, you know, then I have to remember, my government now is a government of theatrics.
Yeah.
So it's very important to talk and look like that. But you can't do it because the nuclear makes it this, you can't go there.
To go back to Trump's tariff policies and economic policies in general, there are the proponents of these kind of policies that you've spoken about that defend these policies under the title of America First will reindustrialize and the American worker will recover his job and a better living wage or whatever. There are the critics. Some of the critics, I hear you now, I hear also maybe Joseph Stiglitz, I hear that this person doesn't know what he's doing. He's in a desperate mode. But I heard your friend also, Yanis Varoufakis, trying to strongman the argument. And he says that this is the imitation of the Nixon shock, trying to recalibrate the world's economy because of the decline of the US economy, by forcing other states to help in the reindustrialization of America and even in paying through extortion, really, by negotiating with each country through extortion, and to reduce the value of the dollar for a certain period of time, which would be at the cost of the American workers to try to reignite the American economic machine. Do you agree with such assumption of the motives of the economic policies that Trump has, or do you don't think that is guided theoretically by any idea?
I guess I'm a little bit different from either of those.
Yeah.
There are theories of what we ought to do. There are policies. They are articulated by a variety of people, some of whom have access to the president and push those theories onto the president. He's not an economist. It's clear that this is not an area that he understands. Just to give you one example that has been so glaring, in speech after speech, when he spoke about the tariffs, he spoke as if the tariff is paid by the country from which goods come into the United States.
Pay the tariffs.
I'm going to hit the Chinese with a tariff. You can't do that. The only people who can put a tax on the Chinese are the Chinese. That's, the only one who can put a tax on Americans, right? He didn't really get it. I'm sure it was explained to him. I know personally some of the economists that he talks to, and I know who they know. Because personally, I come out of the elite education of the United States. I went to Harvard, Stanford, Yale. It's like a joke. It's a poster boy for.
You have all of the people that you know from that kind of entourage.
Yes. And some of these people, I kept because they're friends, personal friends. So I know there are people who advise him. But I think like most presidents who have advisors, the advisors often disagree. And then he has to do something. And if he's careful, he weighs it and makes a decision. If he's not very careful or he's not very sophisticated, he goes with this one this week and the next one the next week. And we get but we get that in all our presidents. And most of them are not economists. And even if they were, they're getting this different advice. There are people who think, honestly, I don't agree with them, but honestly, they think that we can move from a globalization, international export of jobs model of the last 30 to 40 years, and we can now reverse it and become economic nationalists. Put America first. They understand that's a silly slogan. America was always first. There was nothing. That's what all presidents did. That's what they all say. This is silly. But we can have a nationalist program, but it will take many years to achieve. And it is very unclear. Even these people, if you're honest, understand that there's an enormous risk you're taking, that the mass of people who you could get to go along with globalization as an idea, as a rationalization, will not be willing to be fooled twice.
How?
Because they were fooled by globalization. It's good for everybody. No, it isn't. It's good for Elon Musk. It's good for the 10% of Americans who own 80% of the shares of stock. For them, it's been good. The other 90%, no. Having been through that experience, having learned that, there's the risk now that the turn to economic nationalism, with America first, will be criticized effectively because it will be told to the American people, don't be fooled again. This is no more a guarantee of your problems being addressed than globalization was. You're being told, oh, I'm going to bring the industry back here. No, he's not. Industries were coming back, certain industries were coming back here over the last 10 years for other reasons. They continue to come. But there's no big surge of industries, number one. Number two, particularly those that left are not coming back for good reasons. It's irrational for a capitalist to come here. And you're making it worse. You're sending troops into every city. That's an argument for someone not to come here. Not to. But if you look at the companies that are coming, they're overwhelmingly high-tech companies. They want to be where the business for high-tech is good. That's here. And in China. It's not either or. They're busy in China, but they're also busy here because they want to be close to where the business is, where the technology is cutting edge. In other words, the same reasons that make businesses go to China now for high tech, they're coming here for high tech. But one of the aspects of high tech you have to remember, it's not labor intensive.
Yeah.
It doesn't put large numbers of people to work. It puts very small numbers of people to work who have to go through 1 million years of education before you even hire them. And they work in little laboratories. Yes, it's nice. It's not going to solve the American problem. You've deindustrialized, and bringing back high-tech companies doesn't offset that problem. So once you look just a little bit carefully at what Mr. Trump is saying, it's no solution at all. And that's the biggest problem of all for economic nationalism. The turn to the right politically against Biden for Trump is fundamentally saying to the mass of angry people, change is coming. Not just any change, a change that solves your problem. It's going to give you a good job, a secure job, a well-paid. Nothing Mr. Trump is doing guarantees that at all. Could it happen? Yes. But then it's happening for many other reasons, most of which Mr. Trump can't control one way or the other.
But there's also one argument that can explain the urgency to do something, and the Trump administration is trying to do something about it, which is the exorbitant privilege of the dollar as a universal currency.
Right.
So, but now China has trillions of dollars, and it is using these trillions of dollars for its soft power. And also Japan, also Germany, because over the years, the US is in deficit in trading to those countries, and they are amounting lots of dollars. That would be a risk for the United States if one day these amounts of dollars come back to the US, then the dollar doesn't have any value. So there is an urgency to do something now to prevent a later bad situation?
There are two urgencies now that drive everything. One is that. But again, there is the notion, correct in my judgment, that the decline of the dollar is quite some years old. It's not associated with Trump. It was going on before Trump. And again, it is part of the broader decline of the United States. So central banks, which used to keep 70 or 80% of their reserves in dollars, are now keeping on average 40 to 50%. It still makes the dollar the single most important currency in the world, which it still is, but is diminishing it. That's true.
Between brackets, this is what explains the surge in the price of gold?
In part. But the thing with gold, the incredible, gold, people have to understand, in 1970, right, gold was worth about $40 an ounce. Right?
Yeah.
You know what it's worth? 3,000, more than 3,000.
Yeah.
Right? So that is so completely unusual. That dwarfs all inflation. It dwarfs all economic growth. What's going on?
Yeah.
That is a massive vote of anxiety and no confidence in the old world economy. People are and governments are accumulating gold because they understand everything that used to be isn't. And the future is unknown, and all the old economic power is dissolving, and new ones, which we can't quite understand yet, are emerging. So that's the support, I would argue, for what I'm telling you about a changing world economy. These are people looking for protection in that kind of an environment. You want to go to something that will somehow, you hope, hold its value. It's a little bit crazy because gold will only hold its value depending on how this all works out, and that's not a guarantee, but put that aside. But here's the other one. The United States deficit, again, using 1970 as a bracket, the national debt of the United States in the 1970 was a few $100 billion. Total national debt accumulated by the federal government throughout the history of the country, $300 and $400 billion. What is it today? $37 trillion. That again is crazy. That is a growth rate like gold that has nothing to do with underlying. The United States cannot sustain this level of debt. We are the number one debtor country in the world. Japan and China are the two major creditors of the United States. So again, try to understand a global competition between the United States and China when the United States owes China $750 billion, roughly what it is.
Yeah.
Right? The creditor is in a stronger position than the debtor most of the time.
But some would say if the amount is that big, it reverses the roles.
And to some degree it does. But the United States could really hurt them by not paying it back.
No.
And they could really hurt the United States by cashing it in. So you got a real problem. You want interest rates to come down. If the Chinese sell those securities, the interest rate will go up. By the way, the Federal Reserve lowered the interest rate last week.
Yeah.
The interest rates have gone up, not down, up.
Really?
Yes, because you can't control the way you once did. Too many other players with too much money are coming in and making their arrangements. Anyway, the government of the United States has to deal with its deficit. It can't, and the reason was shown to the United States by Britain. A few prime ministers ago, they had a woman named Liz Truss. You may remember. She was just prime minister for a
couple of weeks.
Yeah, a short time. What made her short like that?
No.
She tried to borrow more money for the British government. And the lenders, the British banks and so on, said, no.
They won't lend.
We won't lend to you. You're too in debt. You know what that means when the banks do that? That's when the banks, here's what they mean, but they will never say. You're paying us an enormous interest for the debt you already have. The population of England is learning about how much of their taxes you collect and give to us as interest. And at the same time, you're cutting back medical care, school fees, road maintenance. You're taking their money to give to the big banks. We're looking at a situation where if this keeps on for a few more years, there's going to be a revolt in the street, and they're not going to let you use the taxes for interest. And you're going to come to us and say, we're not paying you. We'll pay you next year or year after. Oh, we're not doing it. America is at that point. They have to do something. They don't know what to do. They're afraid. So what are they going to do? In order to play their theater, they have to have a daily television show in which a specialized group of military wearing a uniform that says ICE go and beat up poor brown and black people from Latin America and put them on an airplane to some airport who knows where, or some horrible prison in El Salvador or something like that, okay? So we have that. That's very expensive. You have to have a whole new army. ICE is a separate army. And they gave an enormous amount of money to ICE so it could hire lots of unemployed men, put them in an ICE uniform, and have them go out there and hassle immigrants.
But this point,
the second thing is they give a ton of money to the Defense Department because that's the rule in America ever since you have to get. So how are they going to cut the deficit? In comes Elon Musk, whose job it is in the first 6 months of the regime to go through every government department other than ICE and the military and cut. So we are having, every day, we all watch headlines in our newspapers. The program looking for cures for cancer saw its budget today cut by, and this one is cut, and that one is cut. He went to, and all of it we were told, we're making the government more efficient. It was actually called the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, Doge. This had nothing to do with efficiency, which any idiot would know, because to cut a budget in half isn't an act of efficiency, it's an act of budget cutting and should be called what it is. It doesn't improve efficiency. If anything, it diminishes it. And there are, I don't know the numbers now, but hundreds of thousands, maybe now in the millions, of government employees have lost their jobs. These were people with a secure job, a government job, reasonably well paid. They are now joining the angry, but they're not angry on the right wing. They're angry on the left wing. And they are changing American politics in that way. And that too comes back to the support for Zoran Mumdani. It's very complicated but this government is desperate. Watching the ICE people beat up elderly ladies from India or who knows, from Lebanon, it's nuts. These are people who have lived here for many years, worked, had income, paid taxes, never done anything beyond a traffic ticket. I mean, it's just silly. But it is the theater. But when you have a theater that is this damaging to the whole system, you know people are desperate. And again, the important thing to understand is desperate. If I may dare, one of the elements of this that is not well appreciated is that the United States, by its actions, is doing something it used to be thought is impossible in American politics.
Which is?
Isolationism.
Wow.
After World War I, there was a reaction, a political reaction, particularly in the Republican Party, after World War I, because that was a trauma. Many young men were killed in that war. It was known to be a terrible war, even though it wasn't fought in the United States. And there was a view expressed, cut yourself off from the old world, Europe. It's an old idea. This is a country born out of a revolution against the British Empire, the 18th century. So there's always a little bit of this thinking in the air. And I think it's coming again. It hasn't yet accepted the name. But America first and anti-globalization, you're halfway there.
Yeah.
And the tariffs are very profound in that way, because the tariffs are a kind of declaration of economic war against everybody. And what the outcome of them will likely be is more and more of an isolation of the United States. It's too late to cut ourselves off from the rest of the world. We depend. One of the things you don't understand, or many don't understand, about the competition between the United States and China is that this is a peculiar competition because China has items which the United States must acquire but does not have. It's not just those rare earths that you hear about. It's many other things that are in the soil of China, and they're not here. And you can't make bombs and missiles, among other things, without them. So it gives China a position so that you can't deal with them the way you can, with certain other countries.
That explains the tensions in the Pacific, the
Of
military
course.
tensions between the US and China.
That's why Mr. Trump, 3 months ago, says there can be no selling of all of these computer chips by the AMD and NVIDIA corporations, big ones here, to China. And then a month later, reverses it. You can sell all the chips, but you must give the United States government 15% of whatever you sell in China. Brand new, another government intervention. Republicans are supposed to be against that. Why did he do it? Because if he has to give something, because the American companies depend on the sales in China. They go out of business. They can't make a profit if they can't sell it to China. China is the biggest user of computer chips, of course, now in the world. So they need to, so they do. And the government helps the deficit because they're going to get 15%. That's like taking 10% of Intel Corporation, buying shares. He has to deal with these multiple problems, and it's not that he has no theory. He doesn't, but that doesn't distinguish him as a president. Very few of them did. They listen, and they deal with what the urgent problem of the day is, and they don't have much time to interrogate that day.
Yeah.
Here's a little thing which I tell to my American audiences, but you should enjoy it too, to get the complexity. China owns $750 billion worth of U.S. debt. It has lent money.
Yeah.
So here are some of the contradictions. China, who's on the side of Russia in the Ukraine war, is lending money to the United States government, which it uses to prosecute that war. You understand? China's on both sides. Now the United States. If you owe China $750 billion, you have to pay interest. It's a loan. So the United States has to collect, by my estimate, 40, maybe $50 billion a year from taxes from me, which all it does is send them to Beijing for them to use to build up the Red Army. Do you understand? Now, if you don't understand these things, then you are going to believe the theater. Well, telling the Chinese what to do. No, you're not.
But going back to Varoufakis' argument, he says that he doesn't believe there is a clash between the US and China. There is a clash between the top 10% in each country against the others in both countries.
Yes, he's right about that. I just look, I know Yanis, and he and I do work together. Yeah. He's been on my television program. I've been on his. Yeah. I would put them together. I think that's going on, but so are the great power clashes between the two.
Because
it's not either or.
Because the financial elite in China do need the dollar privilege because some of their investments are put in the US and everywhere. So they are not benefiting from any crash in the US.
They certainly don't. They certainly don't want anything to happen suddenly. For example, a few years ago, they had over $1 trillion of U.S. debt. So now they have 750.
They're lowering.
But they were very careful, very slowly, and they did not dump them. If they dumped them, the value of the dollar would collapse. Interest rates would go to they don't want that. You're absolutely right. But you know, the sophisticated Chinese economists that I talk to, they will be the first one to tell you, we're not against the United States. We're not against the dollar. We have become a great world power under the regime of the United States. Its global control is the framework within which we don't want that to go away. It's been working really well for us. Mm-hmm. So yes, we have points of disagreement and difficult, but we don't know. If you watch Xi Jinping, their leader, you'll see it's very calm. We're not going to. He doesn't do a tariff unless the United States hits him with one. Then he comes back. But it's very. He says we want globalization. We're not unhappy. It's been wonderful for us, and not just for our top 5%. It's been wonderful for them, but they've lifted their people out of poverty. The UN documents show there are 800 million that they've lifted out of, they're a different country and they handle their wealth differently. But it's clear that they are in no rush for the United States empire, not at all. They are willing, and you think you'll see that in the years ahead, they are willing to bend to help the United States because they don't want it to fall apart. They don't want an uprising in the United States that throws everything into question. They don't want it from the right, but I don't think they want it from the left either. I mean, ideologically, left-wing maybe, but the general leadership of China, very worried about what happens. You can see it in Europe too. The Europeans are now frightened, badly frightened, because the United States is withdrawing from NATO and the protection of Europe. The whole make-believe in Europe today, Russia, the great danger of it, there is no danger for
They want to rebuild their armies now.
Yes, all of that. But that's because the United States is leaving them, is no longer going to protect them, is no longer playing the role it played at the end of World War II. And they don't know what to do. All of these politicians, Starmer, Macron, Merz, Meloni, these are all people who grew up like I did in the Cold War era, Russia bad, the U.S. good, all of that. That's all gone. They know it. They know, and they're very frightened. And they handle their fright by demonizing Putin and Russia. It's childish. Russia is taking the years to conquer a small, poor part of Europe, Ukraine. What is it going to do? Attack France or Germany? It's ridiculous. It's crazy. And once again, you have to ask the question.
Why?
Why would reasonable people, French and German and British and, smart human beings, every bit as smart as you and I, why would they behave in this crazy way? It's a little bit like asking, not that you're asking, but I assume there's interest in why the United States would associate itself the way it has with what Israel is doing in Gaza. Why would otherwise reasonable people do such a crazy thing? First of all, why would the Israelis do it? And then number two, why would the United States be virtually the only country now left of a major, right? The British have now decided to recognize.
Do you think it's a matter of imperial interest or the impact of money in politics and lobbying?
Both.
Or both.
It's not either or. It's also a matter, I believe in history teaching us. And the United States is a settler colonialism. Look what we are Europeans who came here and who physically destroyed the indigenous population. There are a handful left around the country, which we have stuck in concentration camps, which we call reservations. Painful. If you visit them, which I have, it's painful. There you see a moment of the history. But Israel is the only remaining one. The United States had this 2 or 3 centuries ago when Europeans did this all the time, all over. Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, plenty of places. But then it's over. We're in the era of anti-colonialism, except in this. And it's this bizarre effort to do it again in a historical moment. But so the question is, why? Why would you isolate the United States in this way? Tariffs economically smacking everybody, and then this abject support of Israel, likewise politically, ideologically. The UN decides each week now that it's genocide or something like genocide, and it makes the whole world reacts to that, except the United States, where they need. And even now here, the majority of Americans no longer support Israel. It's not the overwhelming, not at all.
So this leads us to our last segment. Just if we now have the overview of the timeline of this decline and what you're describing as a desperate move from this administration, with its theatrics benefiting from the anger at the popular level, especially the poorer, the old labor class. This is the Republican answer. Now, if one moves to the Democratic Party, one would think that, as you mentioned before, the Democratic Party was the representative of this labor class. Why didn't it, not out of idealism maybe, but out of opportunism, pure political opportunism, benefit from its legacy as the defender of the labor class and the poor, to have the populist movement and engage with this popular anger?
I think there are, many reasons, as always, for these things, but I would pick 2 to emphasize. One was that the decline of the American empire has roots going back quite some time. Declines never happen overnight, and they don't happen in 1 or 2 years either. And so there have been signs. There were parts of the country that lost jobs faster than other parts, and so it's uneven, the whole thing. But I think it became clear to both parties and many of the candidates that they put forward that it was not popular for anyone, not Republicans, but not Democrats either, to admit any such decline. That was turned into anti-America or unpatriotic or an agent of Putin, who knows. No. It was a dangerous argument. There were some candidates who tried to say, look, yes, we're great, but here is a real problem. This had a very mixed reaction, and it persuaded the right wing of the Democratic Party, don't go there. But even more important were the disaffection of large numbers of working people who drew the conclusion that the Democratic Party, into which they had placed their hopes, for which they had voted father, son, mother, daughter for years, was just not helping them. It wasn't doing anything. It would say this and say that, but year in and year out, the Republicans would hammer, are you better off? And they weren't. And so the Republicans began to stop voting Republican. Many of them became independent. Democrat. They became independent. Some then joined the Republican, and that worried, again, the right wing of the Democratic Party. But the biggest reason of all, in my opinion, was that the weakness of the political base of the Democratic Party, which they did not recognize, was the fact that starting in 1945, about a third of the American working class was members of trade unions. And the trade unions overwhelmingly supported the Democrats. And they provided many of the campaign workers during the political campaigns. They would just be union officials, still paid by the union, but working full-time for the Democratic Party to get out the vote, to mobilize, advertise. And if you look at the membership and the strength of American unions, it's a line going down without interruption from 1955, when it peaked, to the present. It is now 10% of the labor force unionized. It was once a third. That deprived the Democratic Party of an army of workers, party workers. To deal with that problem, the Democratic Party made the decision to seek donations from the corporations of America, who had been funding the Republican Party because it was more their party. And an increasing number did that, particularly in California, which is more liberal anyway than the United States.
Yeah.
And so the high-tech people began, for example, by being the major donors of the Democratic Party because they have so much money, like Elon Musk. And they made Trump determined to change that, determined to deprive the Democratic Party of that money as a way to become dominant for a long period of time.
That's why we see them lining up behind them all the time.
That's right.
Bezos and Zuckerberg.
That's right. At the inauguration, what does he have behind him? The greatest athletes? No. The greatest actors and actresses? No. The greatest scientists? No. He has the richest people. 8 or 9 of them. You know, Zuckerberg, Musk, they're all sitting
But
there.
usually this is not a very popular image. So usually politicians try to...
He doesn't have that problem. He knows he has that part of his coalition. He has the people. He knows how to manipulate that. It's the money he's after, and he's getting the money. I mean, they are very careful now to support him. He plays the father role. If you don't do what he wants, he punishes. If you do what he wants, he gives. So if you give money, you get the tariff or no tariff or a lower tariff or a suspended tariff, doesn't matter. He will do what you want in most cases. You could see it this last week when he decided to, because he always makes mistakes. So he panders to the population by saying, I'm going to charge $100,000 a year for an HB1 visa. All right, California uses an army of people from China and India and places like that who go do work in high tech.
Yeah.
You know, it's an enormous part of their labor force. And this is, even for them, is a large amount of money every year. It used to be nothing. You know, so within 24 hours, they call him up. And we don't want to. Whoops. Now it's not annual. It's just once. Now
they posted a tweet explaining that, no, it won't be every year.
Right. That's because he got 2 or 3 phone calls from the people sitting behind him saying, no, and then everything gets fixed.
So this was an asset for the Democratic Party that they lost for Trump?
They'll use it. They'll use it, I hope. But the Democratic Party cannot afford to offend its donors.
Wow.
That's the split. For example, Mr. Mumdani plays by the rules. He was a state representative here in the state of New York, and then he decided, nobody thought he could win, he would try for the mayor. He was opposed by the existing incumbent mayor, Eric Adams by name, and he was opposed by the former governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, both of whom were thought to be much more likely. Adams had already won, and Cuomo was the great governor who had won the whole state. Okay, so here he is, and he wins. And he doesn't win by a little. He wins overwhelmingly. I don't remember what the original vote was. I think 12, 15%
maybe.
Greater than Mr. Cuomo. Okay, to this date, Hakeem Jeffries, who's the head of the Democratic Party in the House of Representatives, has not endorsed him. Mr. Schumer, the senator from New York, who's head of the Democratic Party in the Senate, have not endorsed him.
Why?
They are afraid. They don't know what to do. They will be rejected by their donors. I'll give you an example. Michael Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York, gave millions to Mr. Cuomo. He hates Mr. Cuomo for many reasons. He gave him money to defeat Mumdani. These are the people who give huge amounts of money to people running for mayor of New York, let alone presidents and senators. So if you're going to support Mr. Mumdani, you can be sure Michael Bloomberg is going to tell you about it. He's not going to give you money. He's going to give money to your enemy. These people, that's how they live. Our politics is no longer, it was once a politics of organizing each neighborhood. It is not that anymore. In a few places, but that's gone.
But then
Everything is now, how much money do you have for how many tweets and how many Instagram and how many TikToks you can get out there? And that's what it is. And everybody needs the money. And if you don't get the money, you lose.
For that reason, one would think then that it's an uphill battle for the left of the Democratic Party to take over its establishment.
Yes. And the amazing thing is that they're doing as well as they are because they don't have money. Mr. Sanders, he proved something that has shaken American politics. He really proved that he could get enough people that if the average person who gives, I believe it was $27, it adds up, and he has a war chest that's significant because that's as much money as the donors are giving. Of course, the donors aren't stupid. They will understand, if they haven't already, they have to give more, which they're probably doing in order to deal with that risk. Now, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez is a little bit different. She tried the neighborhood. She had enough volunteers to work the neighborhood, and the existing incumbent had moved his home out of Queens, New York, not far from here, to Washington. He was never there. Nobody knew him.
Wow.
So she was able to be there. And so even though she was a young woman, and even though she was a socialist, she won. And no one's going to shake her now because she has a real base. But it's rare for politicians to do that. They don't have and look, there aren't the volunteer. We are a depoliticized society. We are not a people here don't think of politics in the way in other countries they do. It's not the conversation around the table at the dinner or in the family picnic or anything like that. You have to work. The majority of our people don't vote in most elections.
Yeah.
And if you ask them why not, it's because in their judgment, it doesn't matter. It doesn't make a difference. And they're not going to get excited about it. They don't believe what the politicians tell them. So there's a lot of alienation. And one of the ironies is Mr. Trump is elected because he's different. He says unspeakable things, but that's not what the politicians usually do. So he's different. And Mumdani, being Islamic and being a socialist, is very different. And for young people, above all else, that's it. They don't want the old. They don't believe them. They don't trust them. And they shouldn't. And so the young, dynamic person, they'll go for that person. Whether they'll go for them equally left and right, we won't know yet.
My final question is that you've reiterated many times that you see the fall or the end of the American empire looming. Is the fall of the empire a prerequisite for redressing the American economy, or it's the other way around? The economy would fall in parallel to the decline of the empire. So then the incentive would be to keep on with the empire just to keep the economy going.
It's probably more likely the latter. But let me close by reminding you of an American history. When the United States decided to break away from the British Empire and was willing to go to war, 1776, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, all those people, the British decided to fight a war to stop it. The so-called War of Independence, we call it here. The British lost.
Ironically, it was for tariffs also.
Yeah, included tariffs, that's right. 1815, another war, same war. The British tried to undo the independence of the United States, and the United States defeated the British again. After that, the British understood this isn't working. And even though the British toyed with siding with the South in the American Civil War, 1865, they didn't. They went with the North. In other words, they decided that it was better for the British Empire to let the economy of the United States and its politics become an independent country because they lost 2 wars they didn't want to lose anymore. The United States is in that situation. Britain and the United States made a deal after that. I'm sure you know the history. The British said to the Americans, you are now, okay, you take over Latin America, so-called Monroe Doctrine. But you don't bother us, the British Empire, everywhere else. And that was the deal, and we won't have to go to war anymore. All right. Question. Can the United States, as it declines, recognize that it would be better for the United States and its people and its economy to work a deal with the Chinese and the BRICS rather than to be hostile and aggressive all the time? Is it really important to have a war over Taiwan? Is it really important? Answer those questions by saying no. Working out an agreement is infinitely better for this world than having a war over Ukraine or Taiwan, or the way, if you look in European newspapers, overflight of 2 drones in Denmark is an issue you want to go to war about. This is ridiculous. So that's my hope. My hope is that they will understand. And I am impressed by the Chinese because I think they are tempted, with good reason, to think of themselves as the next empire. But they are also smart enough, because they remember earlier Chinese empires, that empires go down too. So maybe the Chinese will support a real multinational world organization, the dream of the League of Nations, the dream of the United Nations. Maybe that's a better thing for them to build than to be yet another empire that is a problem going up and a very serious danger to the world as it goes down.
Thanks a lot, Professor Richard Wolff, for this illuminating episode, and hopefully with more optimistic subjects in the future.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay.